What's up, Flying Lovers? We are back for Monday Night Football, Falcons at Eagles. Looking forward to breaking down the slate. We have a little bit more news than we had earlier in the day, a little bit more information to work with. The big things being Paris Campbell was called up from the practice squad, so he is available. Johnny Wilson also not inactive. He was not on the inactives list. We were kind of wondering maybe Johnny Wilson would end up being inactive. It would be straightforward who we can play at the wide receiver 3 position. Pretty complicated now with both Johnny Wilson and Paris Campbell out there for the Eagles. Britton Covey also on the team, going to be active as a punt returner. Maybe he's active. Maybe he plays a little bit on offense. Will be interesting to see how it breaks down. I don't think it'll be easy to figure out who's going to be playing where, who's going to be getting the snaps for the Eagles from the wide receiver 3 spot. But we'll talk through it, try our best to figure out who's most likely going to get those snaps, run those routes for the Eagles from the wide receiver 3 position. As always, going to be going position by position here: quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, tight ends, defense kickers. At the end, I will take some questions, build some lineups, play around with some lineups that I might like for this slate. As you see on the screen, this is a different screen than I have been showing here. I've been talking a lot about ownership and kind of looking behind the scenes at ownership. And I thought about it and I was like, why don't I just reach out to Roto-Grinders? I have an affiliate deal with Roto-Grinders. Why don't I just reach out to them and see if they'd be okay with me showing their ownership on the screen? So that's what you see here. This is the Roto-Grinders optimizer. You can see the Roto-Grinders projections, their ownership projections, etc. The only downside to this for me, it's not a downside for anybody trying to use the product, but for me, from a content perspective, is harder to break it down position by position. The way they have the optimizer, you can't like filter by position. So I might still go back and forth a little bit between this and the fantasy points projections just to see the list of names at each position: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, make sure that I don't miss anybody. But we can use this now as a reference for what ownership is looking like. It updates in real time. It kind of little notifications at the top. We just updated this projection. We just updated this projection. So it's pretty easy to use. All right, let's start breaking this down. And thank you guys for the reminders. I see several people in chat. Appreciate you reminding people. Please do hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. Trying to grow the channel. Added several new subscribers today. Had a good show with Adam this morning. I think we did a good job breaking it down, but do have more information now. We'll be doing another Showdown show Thursday morning with Adam, and then Thursday afternoon myself. I do the evening before lock shows, Monday, Thursday, and Sunday. So if you subscribe, you can see whenever I go live. You can also hit that notification button if you want to get notifications every time I go live with the Showdown content. In the short term, at least, only doing Showdown breakdowns on this channel. So if you want those notifications, you can hit the notification bell. Thank you guys for the reminder. All right. Going to go starting with quarterbacks, and I'll move over here just so you can see them. I mean, we know who the names are. I moved it to the wrong slate. We know who the names are. Jalen Hurts. It is Kirk Cousins. Jalen Hurts obviously going to be pretty highly owned. I guess we can look on this screen for this one. He is the highest projected player on the slate, as you would expect. He's only 10,000, which is kind of insane for Jalen Hurts. That is just too cheap for Jalen Hurts, the second leading scorer of all quarterbacks last year. Just $10,000. This should be a $11,600, $12,000 player. He's only 10,000, so really easy to fit into your captain spot. Really easy to get into your lineups. You can see here, I have it sorted by flex, just so you don't see the names multiple times. So this is the projections you see here is just for the flex. So projected for 22.73 fantasy points in the flex, 61.5% ownership. That is just for the flex. So keep that in mind. If I did I'll click on captain. Captain spot also projected for another 23% ownership. So overall, looking at about 84% ownership going to Jalen Hurts. Honestly, I have no issue with that. I think that is warranted. As I say, he's the best projected player on the slate. Rushed for 15 touchdowns last year. He's rushed for double-digit touchdowns and at least 600 yards each of the past 3 years. Now, the difference this year is a couple differences. No Jason Kelce. Jason Kelce retired. Really great center, one of the best in the league. So maybe Rush is a little bit less inclined to do the tush push without Jason Kelce there. On top of that, they added Saquon Barkley, so maybe they want to use Saquon Barkley at the goal line a little more, feed the new toy. So some things that you could a little bit adjust if you wanted to think maybe he doesn't have quite the same floor, quite the same upside as last year. But I still think Jalen Hurts is going to be running quite a bit this year. I'm not overly concerned with it. Would you cap salary at something like 49,000 for Showdown? I think that's fine. Yeah. The lower you set your cap, the fewer dupes you're likely to run into, but also the worse your lineup is likely to project. So it's kind of a fine balance there. But I think leaving 1,000 on the table is probably good balance point. We're going to avoid the most duplicated lineups for sure, and still probably you can make good projected lineups. It kind of varies slate to slate. I haven't looked at it closely on this slate yet. Actually, maybe when I build lineups later, I'll get a better idea. But usually you can use leave at least $1,000 on the table and still make pretty good lineups. So I would guess that is a good baseline, leaving 1,000 there. So yeah, Jalen Hurts, like him quite a bit. Not much more needs to be said, I don't think. I think if you're watching this NFL Showdown show, you probably know who Jalen Hurts is. You know the range of outcomes. Oh, I'll just add that as far as correlations go, Jalen Hurts being the elite rusher that he is, you can run him out there without any pass catchers if you want to. I still prefer generally to have him stacked with at least one pass catcher, particularly if you have him in the captain spot. I think it's more viable he's more viable in the flex without any pass catchers. If I have Jalen Hurts at captain, he is one of the few who I think you can play at captain without any pass catchers because he is so elite at rushing. But still, I generally would prefer to have him stacked up with at least one pass catcher to really hit his ultimate ceiling. He's probably going to be throwing at least one touchdown. So I think, even at the captain spot, I would prefer to have, or I guess, sorry, especially at the captain spot, I would prefer to have Jalen Hurts stacked up with at least one passing pass catcher. Kirk Cousins is the opposite sort of Jalen Hurts. He is a statue quarterback. He's always been a statue quarterback. Now he's dealing with a surgically repaired Achilles. He's not going to be running much at all. You definitely want to stack Kirk Cousins. So you can, play Jalen Hurts without stacking Kirk Cousins. I'm always going to be stacking Kirk Cousins no matter where he is in my lineup. Particularly though, if Kirk Cousins is in the captain spot, I want to have multiple pass catchers with him. If he's passing too much to just one receiver, that receiver is probably going to outscore him. He's not doing anything on the ground. So all of his points for them generally are going to be accumulated through the air. So you want him to be spreading the ball around so none of his receivers outscore him, because he's going to be approximately as expensive or more expensive than most of his pass catching options. Actually, I think on this slate, maybe Bijan is more expensive than Kirk Cousins, but Bijan 10,400, Kirk Cousins 9,000. So Bijan is more expensive. Theoretically, Bijan could outscore him and Kirk Cousins still be the optimal captain. But generally, it's still the same general principle applies. You're probably going to want Kirk Cousins multi-stacked if you have him in the captain spot, at least two pass catchers, maybe even three. But yeah, two is generally the rule of thumb is you want to have two pass catchers with your quarterback when he's in the captain spot. You could play three here. But yeah, always more than one for me if I have Kirk Cousins in the captain spot. And Kirk Cousins, you look at the ownership here in the flex for Kirk Cousins is 35% approximately at captain. That's actually pretty low. I think that's come down since earlier in the day. So 35% in the flex, and that can't be right. It says under 1% projected at captain. I don't think that is the correct number for Kirk Cousins. But I think it's going to be under 10%. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that is correct, but that seems like a pretty low number, even for Kirk Cousins. So people don't probably want to play a ton of Kirk Cousins in the captain spot. Yeah, it's not going to be sub 1% though. It'll probably be it was I want to say 6-7% earlier, maybe even 5%. It was pretty low, but it'll be more than 1%. So yeah, I think if these are going to be anywhere close to the number, if 35% is correct in the flex, and even if it is 5% in the captain spot, I think I'll probably end up overweight to the field on Cousins. I do like the price tag being 9,000. The other end of that is Jalen Hurts, only 1,000 more, so it is tough. Yeah, so I probably not playing a ton of Cousins at captain, but at low ownership, I think it is viable. I will at least consider it. Let me just I'm going to look around the industry, because that to me looks almost like an error because it's so low. I can't imagine that is the number that we're going to see on Kirk Cousins. So give me a minute here. I'm just going to look real close at a couple other places, see where they have the ownership on Kirk Cousins at captain, because it's going to be higher than 1%. My guess is lower than 10%, but probably somewhere in the 5% ish range. And It's actually pretty low. It's sub 5%. The first other source I'm looking at does have Kirk Cousins at sub 5%. So close, closer to what they're projecting here than I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be at least like 5%. That is really low. I have interest there. If Kirk Cousins is going to be 5%, I am going to play some Kirk Cousins. Okay, yeah, I appreciate you in chat. Giving me some updates on other places. Yeah, that's lower than it was earlier in the day. So maybe this isn't an error. Maybe they really are projecting him for sub 1% ownership. I don't love playing quarterbacks at captain in general, but he's got pass catchers you compare him with. If he is this low owned, then yeah, that's too low. He's going to be optimal in the captain more than 2% of the time. I'm into it. I will buy in on Kirk Cousins as the captain. Might be a spot that I lean into if he's going to be sub 5%. That is just a little bit too low on Kirk Cousins. So I wasn't planning on saying that I plan on playing some Kirk Cousins at captain, but I think we could very well see a little bit of a bounce back game here for Kirko. So yeah, sign me up for a bit of Kirk Cousins at captain. Again, though, always going to be at least double stacking. Generally, that's kind of the goal is double stacking, but I'm willing to go 3 pass catchers along with him in the captain spot. So looks good to me. Looks a little bit too low for Kirk Cousins. But in general, I don't think I'm going to be having more than 50% total ownership of my lineups with Kirk Cousins, maybe not even 40%. He's not a huge priority for me in general. I just like him in the captain spot because he's projected for such low ownership. That's just, you don't see quarterbacks that low, and particularly quarterbacks that, we've been kind of excited about this offense. He has so many great pass catching options on the team. I'm kind of into it. So I'm going to lean in, play a little bit of Kirk Cousins in the captain spot, even though I don't think it's particularly likely he ends up as the optimal captain. I think it's more likely than 2%, which is where we have him at. All right, let's move on to running backs. And again, I'll pull up just so you can see the available running backs. Bijan Robinson, the best projected. Bijan and Saquon being the main guys. And we have Tyler Rozier, Kenneth Gainwell, Will Shipley, I would say, are the other available running backs we could consider. Jace McClellan is inactive. Avery Williams, I don't think is playable. So I think the top 5 here are at least somewhat playable. Those are the ones that we're going to be thinking about playing. Looking over here at the ownership, we have Saquon Barkley projected for, and I'll go back to just flex. No, actually, let's go captain first. Okay, I did that. See, I'm still learning the optimizer. So I went to flex when I meant to go to captain. That's fine. All right, Saquon Barkley projected for 47% ownership. Bijan at 49% ownership. Both fairly expensive. Saquon 10.6, Bijan 10.4, and then at captain. So we have Bijan projected for. Sorry. Oh, we do have Bijan projected for a little bit more ownership than Saquon, but it is very close there. And then at captain, I'll do this. Captain, we have Saquon at 6.5% projected ownership. And then we have Bijan at 13.36. That's interesting. So we have them pretty close in the flex. Bijan a lot more at captain. So Bijan going to be getting, significantly more ownership overall. I mean, like 8-9%, whatever it was. But pretty close in the captain spot. I like Bijan better. I like the role better for Bijan, and I will show you just looking at the bell cow report from last week. Saquon Barkley, I mean, I guess last week the role was pretty elite for Saquon Barkley, where he took 24 carries, 24 of 25 Eagles carries for Saquon Barkley last week. Also ran routes on 59% of dropbacks, saw 2 targets. But in general, we're just I think we're going to see Bijan much more involved in the passing game. So for DraftKings in particular, I do like Bijan pretty significantly better than Saquon Barkley. The fact that the Eagles are favored in the game, I don't really care about that for Bijan. I think that's actually better for Bijan, better for his pass receiving role. And I'll bring up the Falcons here. Bijan, 18 of 21 carries last week, ran routes on 71% of dropbacks, saw 5 targets. I think that game script actually favors Bijan more than Tyler Algier. I think he just gets more involved if they are playing from behind, as would be the expectation here in Philadelphia. So love the role for Bijan. Definitely my preference over Barkley. Of course, we could get that trio of touchdowns for Barkley again, which would just absolutely destroy me. But I think I'll be underweight to Saquon. Bet against him getting all of the touchdowns again this week. I think Bijan has an easier path to get there without just going crazy with the touchdown. So I like Bijan better in a vacuum, but it is pretty interesting seeing Saquon so low owned in the captain spot in particular. I might end up playing more Saquon, kind of evening it out. So we have at the captain spot, we have again Saquon at 6.5% projected ownership at captain, Bijan at 13.5. So might kind of even that out at captain, have about 10% of each Saquon and Bijan at captain, and then just have a lot more Bijan in the flex, I think is how I might play it. Because we can obviously see the upside for Saquon. We saw it just last week with those 3 touchdowns. It's there, but I think that was kind of a fluky game. I don't think he's always going to be scoring all of the touchdowns for the Eagles. Whereas Bijan just has that crazy ceiling with all of his pass catching work. He's kind of game script independent because he is so involved in the passing game. Now, speaking of Bijan, I think we have to speak a little bit of Tyler Algier. So we look at Tyler Algier's work last week, and by the way, I'll do the promos real quick. So this, what we're looking at right here, this is the Roto Grinders optimizer. If you want $10 off any Roto Grinders product, I do have the link in the description of this video. If you want to try it out, go check that out. It's also, I think, promo code flannel. If you can use that, that would be the promo code. But if you want $10 off any Roto Grinders package, in the description of this video. Now I'm going to move over to the other product I'm using. This is Fantasy Points. This is the Fantasy Points data suite. You can get any product at Fantasy Points 25% off using promo code Flannelman. So check that out if you have not already done so. I love this product. All right, so talking about, Bijan, great role, really independent of game script. Tyler Algier, very game script dependent, and you saw here last week, just 3 carries for Algier, only ran 3 routes, didn't see a target, so not much of a role. After they said during the offseason that Tyler Algier is going to be involved, he's going to get usage. There will be times that they lean on him, was the quotes over the summer. Now, who knows what that means? I don't know if that means they're going to lean on him when Bijan isn't fully healthy. I don't know. I don't know what they meant by that. We're going to lean on him at times, but we got a little bit more clarity, I think, from the coaches. I tried to look it up. So somebody earlier today said that the coaches said that he was going to be more involved going forward. I didn't get that quote anywhere. I was searching for Tyler Algier quotes from the coach in general. What I saw was essentially it's going to be game script dependent. Algier himself said, like, yeah, it's just based on the flow of the game. There'll be games where I get a little bit more involved. The offensive coordinator kind of said, yeah, they're both going to get mixed in, but basically deferred to the running backs coach. Said that, I think the running backs coach does a good job. Miter does a great job of figuring out who to use when. So I do think, yeah, there are going to be games where Algier, I would expect to have a bigger role than he had last week. But I think it's going to be totally based on the game script. So I think if you want to play the game script game, like where do I want to use Bijan? Where do I want to use Algier? Algier is more likely to get in the game with the lead. So if the Falcons are trying to burn some clock, that's when they're going to use Algier. They're not going to use him running routes, through the passing game a ton. He's much more involved, or going to be much more involved, I would expect, in games where the Eagles are playing with the lead. So that would be my recommendation. There is, play Algier only in lineups where you can see, it's the lineup that you build with the thought that the Falcons are going to play with the lead. So if you want to do like a Falcons onslaught, it might make sense to include Algier in that type of lineup. Whereas Bijan, he can play in any type of lineup because, again, he is very game script independent with both his passing game and running game role. In general, though, I think, what is the price tag on Algier? We've got him at 3,600. Doesn't project extremely well. Obviously has major contingent upside. We saw here he's not guaranteed to have much standalone value. Just looking at this again, 9 total snaps, 3 carries, 3 routes run, 0 targets. So not a ton of standalone value there. It could, as I say, it's kind of based on the flow of the game. He'll probably come in more in some situations where they are trying to run a lot more. So he could have some standalone value. I don't think it's ever going to be elite. I think, like, this coaching staff seems to understand that Bijan Robinson is a star, and Tyler Algier averaged like 3 yards per carry last year. So I don't think that they really are that incentivized to get Tyler Algier extremely involved in most game scripts. But I also think he is the very clear backup running back. So the contingent value for Algier is pretty amazing. I don't love playing these two together, Algier and Bijan. I don't think I would set a rule in an optimizer to never play them together. But I think you could. If you're only playing like 10 lineups, I think that is a rule that you could set. The reason I don't think you have to is because, again, Bijan totally game script independent. So if they do get up and Tyler Algier is playing more, Bijan could still be involved. They could be, splitting carries, whatever. So I think you can play them together. But in like limited lineups, in a single lineup, I probably wouldn't. It's not the best pairing. They're both pretty expensive. So not my favorite pairing in general. But yeah, I think he's a decent play at what's the project ownership. Okay, I forgot I have this here now. So if we go to flex, nope, I did that. I keep on doing this completely backwards. I'll figure this out over time. I think, yeah, okay. Algier, we have the ownership at that's not that low owned. 12.67% projected ownership. They've got him projected for 6 fantasy points. So larger projection here on Algier, and that's just in the flex. Honestly, that's not quite low enough where I love the play. I'd get to some in a 150 set because we do clearly have that contingent upside, but I'd like it a lot better at percent for Algier. Like that is kind of a big difference there. That is a pretty significant number for a guy that saw 9 snaps, had three carries with 3 routes last week. So not my favorite play on the slate. I think he's probably going to be actually somewhat of a fade for me. Hard to get behind that number on Algier because even if things go perfectly for you, Bijan stubs his toe and has to miss a half, and Algier comes in for the whole game. You're still competing with 13% of the field in the flex, and then whatever it is, a captain as well. So even in the best case scenario, you're not really getting a low owned player, and I think in most scenarios he's not going to be all that involved. So I think I'm largely out on Algier. Kenneth Gainwell, we saw, did have the bigger role than Will Shipley last week for the Eagles. I'll bring that up here. Not a huge role. Kenneth Gainwell played 14 snaps to Will Shipley's 4. He only had 1 carry on those 14 snaps. He did run 7 routes, which is not the worst. Only saw 1 target on those 7 routes. I don't hate the idea of pairing Saquon with Kenneth Gainwell. I think that Gainwell, as you can see here, they both played some snaps. 60 for Barkley, incredible role for Saquon Barkley, but maybe Kenneth Gainwell eats into it a little bit more. He had a little bit of a role last week. 7 routes, maybe he gets 3 targets instead of just 1 on 7 routes this week. I think that he is certainly playable. I like him. I like Gainwell better than Algier in general, and I think I'd be more inclined to play him with Barkley because I don't think he's quite as game script dependent as Algier. I think he might have a role regardless. Not going to be a huge role. I also think that he still has that contingent value where if Barkley goes down, I think Gainwell will be the 1A, Shipley the 1B. Maybe they both have a little bit of a role. And then Shipley, it's tough because last week was obviously his first game in the NFL. So sort of actually promising to see that he actually got some run in his first game. He played 4 snaps. I like that he ran 3 routes on those 4 snaps. That's promising that they want to use him in the passing game. Makes it easier for him to rack up fantasy points if he is going to be involved in the passing game. The price is $2,000 to Kenneth Gainwell, $2,800. So those prices, Gainwell's price is better for his role. Not a big enough difference in the price based on what we saw last week. And then if you look at the ownership, though, let's pull up the flex ownership. We've got Gainwell at 8% projected flex ownership. So he's lower owned than Algier. 8.25% for Gainwell. And then we have Shipley at, okay, well, there it becomes interesting because Shipley at 1%. I like that. I think that's actually a better play. I like both of these Eagles running backs, I think, better than Algier at ownership. Now, Algier, the most likely probably to take on a bigger role than either of those two, but because of the ownership and because he has a higher price tag, I think Gainwell and Shipley better bets. Gainwell, the more likely to hit to have more of a role this week. But Shipley, maybe that was just a first game thing. Maybe he does take on a bigger role this week. He did run 3 routes, which is promising. Maybe he's a little bit involved in the passing game. So I think both playable. Of course, Jalen Hurts doesn't target running backs a ton anyway. So the fact that he is involved in the passing game and didn't have any carries last week, probably not get a huge role here with the Eagles in the passing game, but at his price tag, at this ownership is really what it comes down to. I think this is a fair ownership number where I would want to take an overweight stance on Will Shipley at 1%. But his role is not going to be huge as long as Saquon Barkley is healthy, as long as the game is not out of hand. Probably not going to have a huge role. I do think Will Shipley, the more likely running back to get some run in a blowout. So he has that contingent upside also without an injury. Could just, if there's a blowout, maybe he's the guy they use to run out the clock. So can think about that also. But yeah, at this level of ownership, I kind of like it. All right. Do we talk about every running back? Let me check it again, and then I'll check chat. Sorry, I've been too busy looking at all this stuff that I have not been in chat. So I will be with you in a second, see if there are any questions I need to get to. No, I think I covered all of it. Like Bijan, better than Saquon in the flex. I think I like Saquon about the same because of the lower ownership in the captain spot. Like Gainwell, probably the best of the backup running backs, followed by Shipley. Algier, it's really just because of the ownership. Like I think that the price tag is fine. He has so much contingent upside, but because the ownership is so high as well as the price tag, I think that is going to be somewhat of a fade for me. And I'll just keep my fingers crossed that Bijan does not get hurt. All right. I will move on to receivers, but before I do that, let me just check on any questions. Yes, Jim, we can bink. Let's do it. Let's bink tonight. All right. Paris Campbell, punt viable? I believe so. I think that the fact that they called him up, I think that he is punt viable. Well, I'll get to wide receivers next. Favorite captain, honestly, might just be Jalen Hurts. The price is too low. He's gonna get a lot of ownership, but it's still not like overbearing ownership. I think that this might be a slate where I just kind of lean into the studs. We do have so much value too that I like just taking the raw big score at captain. So it would be probably Hurts first, but also really like Bijan, Saquon. Seeing that low ownership, I actually. I'm not the biggest. I'm kind of a Saquon fader in general, but at that low ownership, I'll take some shots on Saquon. Hope that he gets a couple of touchdowns. But yeah, it's mostly the studs who I really think have big opportunities. So probably Jalen Hurts would be my number one captain. I like Devonta Smith, also just going to step into a bigger role. Obviously has that major upside. Yeah, so I like the guys who have the big upside at captain tonight, and then just fill in with value in the flex would be the general answer. And yes, Den, yes, I'm in. Let's two-way bink. I'm in. Deal. All right, just scrolling up a little bit. Apologies for missing if I missed your chats. I apologize for that, but gotta keep on schedule. Gotta talk through the slate. Other people, if you want to answer these season-long questions, you're probably better suited to do so than I am right now. I have my mind fully focused on the showdown, so not going to answer season-long right now. But chat, if you want to answer, go ahead. Okay. In a 150 set, how many captains do I typically use? I like to spread it out. Typically, I usually set my captain cap at 20%, so I never get more than 20% of any captain. But that's kind of just a matter of personal preference. Of risk tolerance. Yeah, but for me, I like to spread it out. And I think that'll be the case on this slate too, although I might end up, setting it like 30% for Jalen Hurts. So I might be a little bit more condensed to the stars on this slate than I usually am. But typically I end up with, honestly, like in a 150 set with randomness on 12, 13 captains. I think I like to spread it out quite a bit. All right. Let's move on to wide receivers. And I will update on the side so people can see where we are. Okay. Receivers, Devonta Smith. So I mentioned at the top of the show, AJ Brown is out for this game. That's the big thing. So we get to see a shakeup with all of these Eagles receivers. Let me see if they've actually updated on fantasy points. I will refresh this. And I'll go back to the optimizer to see. We can talk about it through here because we know kind of what we need to talk about with the Eagles anyway. So looking at the Eagles in flex, I'm going to sort by projection again. Devonta Smith, the third best projection on the slate, just behind the running backs and Jalen Hurts. Steps into a bigger role without AJ Brown there. On the other hand, might be covered a little bit more. Maybe they focus on Devonta Smith a little bit more. Kind of hard to know what to expect here, but you got to think the Eagles want to get him the ball. He is their very clear best receiver now. Like with AJ Brown there, they have two star receivers. Now Devonta Smith is really the only star on the team, so they are going to try to get him the ball. Just a matter of, is Atlanta going to focus on stopping Devonta Smith? They probably will. I don't know if they're going to succeed at that. The projection, 19 fantasy points, looks really good. He looks like a very good play, only projected for 46% ownership in the flex. That seems fair to me. Slightly lower than the running backs. Looks like Saquon's must be updating right now. Interesting. I like Devonta Smith at 46% projected ownership, 19 fantasy points. I like him at the captain spot. I think, there's high volatility in how this game could go for Devonta Smith because the Falcons are probably going to try to stop him. So they could really limit him. Maybe he does not have that breakout game that we're expecting. But on the other hand, maybe you just can't guard Devonta Smith. Maybe this Falcons defense is not capable of stopping Devonta Smith. Maybe he has over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. I think that's within the range of outcomes for Devonta Smith. So I like him quite a bit. I will be probably above weight to the field on Devonta Smith. I think I'll end up lower than the field on Kirk Cousins would be my guess, and over on Devonta Smith. Let me go back here, see if they've updated for wide receivers. Really, really strong play in general with no AJ Brown there. The pretty clear, very clear wide receiver one on the Eagles. And have we updated? All right, still no Paris Campbell. All right, I'm just going to ignore that. I like Devonta Smith. Not sure if there's that much more to say about it. Like we kind of know the drill. He's stepping in. He has not played without AJ Brown. I looked that up this morning. Double checked it. He has not played over the past 2 years since AJ Brown joined the Eagles. We have not seen Devonta Smith without AJ Brown for any kind of real period. It's been, they both are playing significant number of snaps every game together. So we can't really see what the Eagles want to do without AJ Brown, how much they're going to force feed him the ball. We don't really have that sample over the past couple of years. But I think he's going to be a focal point. He's usually a focal point, should be just that much more of a focal point here. Beyond Devonta Smith, it gets complicated now. So we Jahan Dotson, also the pretty clear number 2 here. He was already a starting receiver for the Eagles. Projects okay, 9 fantasy points at 4,000. That's pretty good. That's pretty solid value on Jahan Dotson. This is interesting. Up to 42% projected ownership in the flex. That is really high ownership for Jahan Dotson, for a player who is honestly pretty hit or miss. He could have, a long one, just burn them. Maybe he benefits from double coverage on Devonta Smith. If they do want to just take away Smith, maybe Jahan Dotson benefits from that coverage. But man, that's really high ownership, 42% on Jahan Dotson. Like he is definitely too cheap for his role as a wide receiver 2 on this team. But there are still paths to fail. So captain, okay, that is not updated. Do I want to try refreshing here? I'll do it. I'll see if that works. Seems like they're updating the projections in real time, and that's why we're missing some things. But okay, updating here. So we still have Devonta Smith at 22% captain ownership. That is a bit high, so I like him. I'll probably honestly lightly fade that, even though he is one of my favorite captains, and I do plan on playing a lot of studs at captain. I think I'll probably lightly fade 22% on Devonta Smith. So over 70% projected total ownership on Devonta Smith. It's high. That is a high number. He's cheap. He's going to have a big role. My guess is I come in maybe slightly light on that. I don't think I'm going to have him in over 80% of my lineup. So I think it's pretty likely I come in sub 70% on Devonta Smith overall. But strong play for sure. Play the guys who project really well. He projects really well. I'll probably play a little bit more of Bijan, Jalen Hurts at the expense of the other studs. back to so Jahan Dotson, I think is going to be again another light fade for me. Just I think that the ownership is a little bit too much on Jahan Dotson, even though he is too cheap for his role. I think that there are ways for it to fail. He's a receiver, he needs to get open. That they need to get him the ball. It's not like a running back where he's going to just get that volume because of the role. It's he's the volume he has to get open and they need to actually get him the ball. So even with the expanded role. Should have opportunities, but there's no guarantee that those opportunities actually come to fruition, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So if he's going to be over 50% total ownership, and I was looking up the Jahan Dotson captain ownership. We had him over 40% in the flex. 7% in captain. I actually don't hate that. 7% at captain for Jahan Dotson, given that he is such a big play kind of receiver. I think that's a fair number on Jahan Dotson. I don't hate that as much as the 40% in the flex. But yeah, I think I'll probably be a little bit light there in the flex on Jahan Dotson. See if that has changed here at all. Okay, it's come down. So I guess they were updating and it caused me. I needed to refresh. So 31% projected ownership. That's a little bit better on Jahan Dotson. Probably closer to where I want to be on him. Seems like a fair number. Can I please zoom in a little? Yeah. Let me see. It might cause issues, but yeah, I guess we don't need the right side of the screen. We can still see the things we need. Yeah, I think that's fine. Okay. All right. Beyond Jahan Dotson. So I think it's pretty clear Devonta Smith is the number 1 receiver, Jahan Dotson, the number 2 receiver for Philly. Number 3 is where it gets complicated. I don't think that Britton Covey is going to have a role in the offense. I did see something that he showed up to the field. He's been on the field for like hours. Like before I came on, it was 2 hours before game time. Britton Covey was on the field, which kind of makes me think maybe he's thinking he's going to have some role. Maybe he will play some offensive snaps. So maybe he's just showing up that early to take punts to get ready for the punt return. That is his usual role on the Eagles, but that does give me a little bit of pause to make me think maybe he does see the field a little bit. I think I'm mostly going to play it though, as though Britton Covey is not going to be much of a factor, not going to see at least more than a few offensive snaps. He just hasn't in his career. He's been the punt returner. He's usually there. He starts every game as a punt returner, doesn't really play offensive snaps. I think that is still going to be the case for Britton Covey. Flambuki says he is the number 2 receiver. No, Jahan Dotson is the number 2 receiver. You could argue that he's the number 3 receiver, but I'm not really expecting it with Johnny Wilson active and after calling up Paris Campbell. My guess would be that those two are more likely to see the field than Britton Covey. Just he's always active, and he never sees the field when the team is on offense, only sees the field as a punt returner. So I'm not really going to be, I don't think, playing a ton of Britton Covey. I guess we can look at the projection, see if they disagree with me on Britton Covey. I'm going to sort by fantasy points here. They have Britton Covey at 0.58, which maybe suggests they're anticipating he might see the field a little bit. It might also be that they think he's going to be the punt returner, so he could could get 6 points from a punt return touchdown. There are ways for it to hit. Maybe he'll see the field for 5 snaps. Have some role. I don't think that he is going to be their preferred option of the other receivers beyond Devonta Smith and Jahan Dotson. That would not be my expectation, just based on how they've used him in the past. Even when he is, on the team, active as a punt returner, they've just never used him on offense. So I think it's a little bit more likely that they go to one of Paris Campbell or Johnny Wilson. As you can see here, projected about the same. It's really we're throwing our hands in the air with this one. Nobody really knows what to expect from the wide receiver 3 position for the Eagles. My guess is that Paris Campbell plays more. I like them both. Actually, let's take a look at the ownership here. So we have Paris Campbell projected for 8% ownership, Johnny Wilson at 15.5. So with those numbers in mind, I'll take the 200 guy at 8% ownership, projecting about the same. I don't feel confident in it. I don't know that they want to give Paris Campbell a big role, but he is a guy at over 600 yards 2 years ago when he was on the Colts. So He's been a capable NFL receiver in the past. My guess would be that Johnny Wilson is not somebody that they're going to give a full-time role to. You look at how they used him in his first game, ran 2 routes, did see a target, so that's promising. He's 6'6". He's a 6'6" rookie. For those of you who are not familiar with Johnny Wilson, could be an end zone threat. So I think he's in play even in a limited capacity, just because he's more likely to be used. He's like a tight end. Like, yeah, he might not see the field all that much, and then he comes in on the 5-yard line and they throw it up to him because he's a 6'6" athletic rookie. So yeah, I think that they're both solid plays. I think that Paris Campbell is honestly, I want to call him the safer play. I don't think either of them is that safe, but I think Paris Campbell is the one who I would think is more likely to run more routes. Like, if I had to guess between the trio of Paris Campbell, Johnny Wilson, Britton Covey, I would guess that it goes Paris Campbell, Johnny Wilson, Britton Covey in terms of routes run. So to me, I think Paris Campbell feels like the somewhat more likely to run the most routes, but I could be totally wrong there. Just to be upfront about that, he was inactive last week. Johnny Wilson did see the field more. Maybe they do. Maybe they just do believe in Johnny Wilson, their big rookie receiver. Maybe he is the straight up wide receiver 3. I like them both at low ownership. Paris Campbell lower ownership, so I think a slight preference there for Paris Campbell, but not a large preference there. I think I'm not going to be playing Britton Covey, and I'll just lose if he happens to be on the field more than I expect and scores a touchdown or does something with his playing time. He's also not the min price, so it would probably take a touchdown for Britton Covey to pay off his price tag, or a handful of receivers, not just a couple receptions, not just a couple. So I think the way I'm playing is probably going to be fading Britton Covey. I'll probably be about even with the field on Johnny Wilson, above weight to the field on Paris Campbell is the way that I am probably playing it with this trio of receivers. Noah, who's your likely under $4,000 best play? Adam and I talked about it this morning. I think the answer that I gave was the Falcons defense, which is probably a boring answer, but I think that they're the one that is going to go the most under-owned. But I like honestly several options on the slate. Just going to looking at the salaries in the flex. Jahan Dotson is 4,000. He's a strong value, but he's not like Isaiah Likely because he's getting a ton of ownership here. Ray McLeod, similarly great value, but also going to be getting significant ownership. Gainwell is up there, so it'd be probably for me Gainwell, Paris Campbell, Falcons defense would probably be the 3 that I feel the best about sub 4,000. Okay. Now speaking of those Falcons receivers, I think we made it through. Yeah, that's all of the Eagles receivers to go through. Falcons receivers, you have Drake London is the I want to say clear alpha. I want to say expected alpha because we look at the last week's stuff and I'll go. So Drake London, 7,800 projects the best. He was, a first round pick, second round pick in best ball all summer in fantasy drafts. Expected to take a big step forward this year with Kirk Cousins, with the new offensive coordinator, all that. We're expecting big things from Drake London this year. Behind Drake London, we have Darnell Mooney, ran the most routes on the team last week. He's 5,400. Ray McLeod, just 3,000. I think those are the only 3 Eagles receivers that I'm playing in a 150 set. Maybe you play a Kadero Hard, somebody else, just in case somebody gets hurt or for garbage time or something. But outside of that, outside of like a 150 set, I think I'm only playing those 3 receivers from the Falcons. And if we look at the receiving numbers from last week for the Falcons, again, Darnell Mooney led the team in routes run, 85.7%. You see ties here between Darnell Mooney, Drake London, and Kyle Pitts. Each had just 3 targets last week, so not a ton of passing in that game in general. Really tough game against the Steelers. They have a very strong defense. The offense has never really got going last week for the Falcons. Darnell Mooney, 5,400. Pretty solidly, I would say the wide receiver 2 based on like what we expect from him, based on his routes are right around where we expect them to be. His target share at 11.5% is probably around where we expect it to be, maybe a little bit lighter than I would hope for it to be. But I think he's fine value at 5,400. We'll take a look at the ownership to really decide what I think. Drake London, 82% route participation, also just 3 targets. That's really disappointing for Drake London for the steps we expect him to take going forward. I'm not going to read too much into a 1-game sample size. The one that really stands out, though, as far as wide receivers go, Ray McLeod only ran routes on 53.6% of dropbacks, saw a team high 7 targets. Everybody else gets 3 targets. Ray McLeod gets 7 last week. He was also the first read on 5 of those targets. I'm trying to find it here, but I can just tell you. First read on 5 targets last week. So Ray McLeod, they were trying to get him the ball, and they got it to him on 7 different targets. He had 4 receptions for 52 yards last week, and he's just 3,000. Obviously, I don't think that's going to stay that way. I don't think that Ray McLeod is going to be a target hog for the Falcons. They have a ton of talent in this offense. He is pretty far down the pecking order. But the fact that he saw 7 targets last week, that's at least promising. Peppertoni, that's a good question. I don't have the AS pulled up. That is a good fantasy points. It's the average separation score on fantasy points. For those of you who are not familiar with AS, I have not looked up Ray McLeod's AS score. Maybe I'll do that after if we have time in a little bit. But first, I'll get through just talking through all of these players. Let's take a look at the ownership here. So going back to just the flex, we have Drake London at 38.5% projected ownership. That's pretty low for a $7,800 Drake London against an Eagles defense that was not great last week. At least showed some holes in it. Kind of like that number. 38.5 seems fair for Drake London. Darnell Mooney, 20.5, honestly also seems fair to me. He's 5,400, so not as cheap when we have several true value options. I think maybe getting lost in the shuffle a little bit because he is so mid-priced. But looking at factoring the ownership, I might like him better than Jahan Dotson. It's close because Jahan Dotson, the ownership dropped down to 31% from 40 some. I think he's a pretty strong option at 20.5%. I do like that number on Darnell Mooney. I would expect that I come in just slightly overweight to that. I don't think I'm going to have 40% Darnell Mooney, so probably around 30-ish% would be my goal for ownership on Darnell Mooney in the flex. Beyond those two, so Ray McLeod, as we talked about, 7 targets last week, projected for just 23.66% ownership at 3,000. That seems pretty fair. I don't think that I'm going to be going out of my way to be above weight to the field on Ray McLeod. I think I'm going to just fade I think that was so fluky. I don't expect that to happen much going forward. I could be totally wrong. The fact that he had 5 first read targets last week does make me question everything I know about the Falcons. So I think it's fair. I think 3,000 price tag, that ownership is fine. I don't think I'm taking a huge stand there. Probably going to try to match the field there, I think. Because he could just have, if he just gets 5 receptions again, probably paying off that $3,000 price tag. His stat line from last week would be enough to pay off this price tag most likely, and didn't score a touchdown or anything. My guess would be that he is not going to be targeted 7 times again. Maybe it comes down to 4 targets in this game. Maybe he catches 2 of them for 30 yards, and his number doesn't kill you. His actual score doesn't kill you. But I think it'll be a neutral to light fade for me on Ray McLeod. I'm not taking a stand just because he had 7 targets last week. I think that they're going to get their stars the ball. All right, so that does it for the Eagles receivers. Move over to talking about some tight ends. And, we've got a pretty clear top 2 at tight end, Kyle Pitts and Dallas Goedert. Kyle Pitts, just 6,800. He's, again, I don't know. Is he going to be a thing? I've been expecting him to be a thing every year. We expect this to be the year Kyle Pitts takes off, is a lot better. He was, kind of banged up, pretty clearly banged up for most of the year last year. Also, Arthur Smith was the offensive coordinator. A lot of things holding Kyle Pitts back last year. The general expectation this year has been that Kyle Pitts is ready to break out. He still has the talent, I think. I still think he's pretty likely to break out. But what we saw last week, didn't love that. He was the first read target just once in the entire game. He was targeted just 3 times in total in the game. Route participation is solid for a tight end, 78.6%. I'll take that at the tight end position, but the actual usage does concern me a little bit on Kyle Pitts. Comes down to then the ownership number, which here in the flex we have Kyle Pitts. That can't be right. Sub 20% on Kyle Pitts. Yeah, I'm buying. I am buying sub 20% Kyle Pitts, 6,800. I still think he has a talent. I'm gonna martingale this one more time. I've been hurt. I've been burned so many times by Kyle Pitts, and I'm ready to be hurt again. 6,800, sub 20%. That is a really fair number for Kyle Pitts. So sign me up. I will be definitely above weight to the field. That might end up being a pretty big stand for me. I could see myself getting up to 20%, 40% on Kyle Pitts. I think that is going to be a big stand for me. Hoping for that 2-touchdown game, that 100-yard receiving game. I think it's still in his bag of tricks somewhere. I know you do, Nick. I've seen it several times. Yeah, I like Kyle Pitts. That's a really low ownership number for a player with his talent, I think. So I'm into it. I will be playing a good amount of Kyle Pitts. Dallas Goedert also could benefit quite a bit from AJ Brown. So I think AJ Brown being out, I like this number on Dallas Goedert also. I mean, he's more projected ownership than Kyle Pitts, so I don't know that I'm going to be taking as big of a stand, but I could see myself playing 35-40% of Dallas Goedert also, maybe just a little bit less than Kyle Pitts, but still above weight to the field. I think 5,800, that is a fair price tag for Dallas Goedert, a low price tag with AJ Brown. I think he could just soak up some of that usage from AJ Brown's departure. It might not be those tertiary receivers that we talked about. Maybe it's just Dallas Goedert getting the ball a little bit more. So I like this number. I think it's a fair price tag on him. The ownership is not crazy. I think I'll end up overweight to the field on Dallas Goedert. Another interesting discussion point is, are they going to run more 2 tight end sets without having AJ Brown there? I'm in the wrong tab here. Grant Calcaterra doesn't project all that well, hasn't really shown his receiving ability in the NFL yet. He was a capable receiver in college. I don't watch college football. I had to look that up. Read a little bit about him today. Sounds like he was a pretty capable, sure-handed receiver in college, that there's some hope that he becomes a decent receiving tight end in the NFL. I don't know that I'm going to play any Grant Calcaterra. I think he's playable because, again, they might just change up the offense a little bit, use him in 2 tight end sets rather than going to all of those tertiary receivers with Johnny Wilson, still kind of banged up. Looked like he was out on the practice field trying to get it loose. Still don't know if, the fact that they didn't make him inactive doesn't necessarily mean that he is really ready to go with Johnny Wilson. So just want to note that he's still trying to testing it out prior to the game. Probably good to go, but still some risk there. I don't think that they're going to just go to Grant Calcaterra in 2 tight end sets as much. I think it's still more likely that they just go to their secondary, tertiary receivers a little bit more, give it to Dallas Goedert a little bit more. He hasn't really shown it yet, but 2,400. Also, the price tag is not that low. He probably needs to score a touchdown. I don't really think Grant Calcaterra is going to have 6 receptions, or maybe we can do it with 4 receptions for 40 yards. Maybe that's enough at his price tag, but that's kind of borderline. Probably needs a touchdown to very clearly pay off his price tag. Yeah, not projected really well anywhere. I mean, they have him at 0% ownership. He'll get a little bit of ownership. It'll be a little bit more than 0%, but it's a thin play, Grant Calcaterra. I think that you can make a case that they will just change up the offense, do more 2 tight end sets. I don't think that they're going to go. Okay, thank you for that, Calcaterra. I was wondering. I meant to check that out. Appreciate you, Crutches. Calcaterra, I don't think is going to be a big part of my lineups, but honestly, if I play him in 1 out of 40 lineups, whatever I'm playing tonight, maybe I'll play a lineup, and maybe that's enough to be above weight to the field. So maybe I take it back. Maybe I'll be above weight to the field with him in 1 to 2 lineups. I don't feel strongly, but I think it's a not a player who's probably not going to see a ton of volume, but could score a touchdown. I guess it's kind of how I see Grant Calcaterra, which is often the case for backup tight ends. I don't think he's likely to get there. He's probably going to score a touchdown at some point during the season. especially a little bit more likely with AJ Brown out. So I think he's a fine play, but not like a focal point for me. Maybe I would have him in 1 out of 30, 40 lineups. That's probably about the line where I'm at with Grant Calcaterra. And then finally, there's only other one tight end, which is Charlie Warner. It was interesting looking at the stats, as Ship pointed out to me. The 2 first read targets Charlie Warner saw last week was more than Kyle Pitts' 1. So hate to see that, but he's 1,200. Not super involved last week. He ran 21% of the routes, 6 total routes. Did see 2 targets. They were both first read targets. Had 1 reception for 4 yards. I think he's in play, honestly, kind of in the same bucket as Grant Calcaterra, where he's not going to have a huge role here. He will see the field. Maybe you'll see a couple targets again. If he converts one of them for a touchdown, you'll want him in your lineups. If not, you won't. That's kind of the deal with Charlie Warner. Actually, did Calcaterra play last week? Yeah, actually 26% route participation last week, 10 routes. So he actually had the better role last week. Yeah, maybe I'd be a little bit more inclined than I thought. Maybe I'd have 2 in 40 lineups, 2 Calcaterra lineups. It's still not somebody I'm going out of my way to get to, but with AJ Brown out, I guess you could make the case that 26% routes last week, maybe knock that up to 35% routes at low ownership. I think that both of these backup tight ends are in play. Neither huge priorities for me, like Gerald Everett was yesterday. RIP. That did not go so well. But I think both are playable, just not like, don't have a ton of confidence when you're playing them. The floor is absolutely 0 on both Calcaterra and Charlie Warner. But the ceiling is they score a touchdown. Their tight ends tend to be more involved in the red zone. I think that could happen. All right. Warner or Paris Campbell. I mean, Paris Campbell is like the clear, like safer option to me. I think he's the more likely to have a significant role where he actually runs 50% plus of the routes. I think that's in the range of outcomes for Paris Campbell. I don't really see that happening with Warner unless we see an injury to Kyle Pitts, which I guess is possible. But without an injury, I think Paris Campbell is more likely to have a bigger role. Not guaranteed. Could be Johnny Wilson as the wide receiver 3 there. But yeah, Paris Campbell over Warner would be the call for me. I feel more confident in the Paris Campbell. All right, so we talked about the tight ends. I will check for any questions, and then we can talk about the other. I mean, defense kicker is also a big part of this game for me, so I don't want to skip past that. Yeah, I like the defenses and the kickers, as I usually do. The defenses in particular, I think the Falcons are going to go very low owned in this game, and I think it's worth noting. Jalen Hurts, 15 interceptions last year, was 3rd in the NFL, 3rd most interceptions thrown in the NFL. On top of that, 11th most sacked quarterback. So kind of middle of the pack in terms of the number of sacks he took. But with the Falcons being only 3,200 and not getting much ownership at all, that's a spot where I want to lean into the defense a little bit. I know people hate it playing defenses; they hate to see defenses do well. I know Crutches hate seeing kickers do well also, but I'm okay. I'm okay with these players doing well. I like a low-owned Falcons projected for 11.5% ownership at 3,400 against an Eagles team that has a quarterback who threw 15 interceptions last year. That seems pretty fair to me. More fun to play for offensive onslaughts, but I think this is lower owned than the Falcons defense should be. I think that they're a middling defense. I don't think they're like a really good defense, but I do think that they're a capable defense. AJ Brown out, maybe the Eagles struggle a little bit more than usual. So I really like the Falcons defense, and just know they might get negative points. That's within the range of outcomes for the Falcons defense. So know that when you're playing them, there's no guarantees, but just given the low ownership there, the matchup, I'm into it. I'm going to play some Falcons defense, but also the Eagles defense I like quite a bit too. So I'm very into the defenses on this slate. I'll have some double defense lineups for sure. The Eagles, I think, are a better defense than we saw last week. And you may recall I was very into playing the game a couple weeks ago, the Brazil game. I said I was going to play it as though the Eagles defense was elite, and it didn't go according to plan. That strategy. And here's I have to say this at least once per show. I play everything for large field tournaments, so I'm not playing things that I think this is the most likely scenario. I play things for I think that this scenario is more likely than the number of people are going to play it in the field. And I think one way to do that, I think the Eagles defense, again, I think could be better than they have shown. They weren't that great last year, but they have the talent. And the only game we've seen them play so far was the Brazil game, where the field conditions were awful. And awful field conditions are going to favor the offense because the offense knows where they want to go. The defense has to react. That's tough when you have tough field conditions. So I think I'm still not fully convinced that it wasn't just kind of a fluke last week with the Eagles. I still think that they might be better than they were last year. On top of that, Kirk Cousins is a statue, can't move. I think they could have a number of sacks. I think they could have turnovers. Kirk Cousins might not be the stud that we thought he was last year. So yeah, I'm into both of the defenses. I always think the kickers tend to go a little bit under-owned. Looking at Jake Elliott projected for 15% ownership for Jake Elliott. He's expensive. Actually, both these kickers, 5,000 for Koo, 14% ownership. Jake Elliott 15%. I think both pretty strong. They're going to get squeezed because of Darnell Mooney, Jahan Dotson, all the other value options tends to squeeze out. People don't want to play the kickers and defenses. They'd rather play. It's more fun to make a bet on a cheaper receiver. So I think all going to go a little bit under-owned. I'm going to be leaning into kickers and defenses across my lineup. So I'm going to be overweight to all, but I think especially the defenses for me. More fun. I enjoy cheering for the defenses to do well. I think it's fun. Just lean into it, guys. Just play the defenses, and then you get to cheer for defenses to destroy the offenses. It's actually fun. All right, I will move on to taking any questions. Maybe build a couple lineups. All right, so I'll first read through chat as I take a sip of my beer because my voice I'm losing a little bit. Interesting. All right. That is good information. Balding Left says Covey lining up with Devonta Smith in warmups in the slot. So do we think that he is Devonta Smith's backup in the slot? Because we would have Paris Campbell also historically played 81% of the slot last year. So that has been where he has played. So that does make me more interested in Covey. Let me go look at what we're seeing here. He's going to start, then I'll adjust my take on Lovey. Britton Covey lining up outside with Devonta Smith in the slot and warmups. Okay, Britton Covey lining up outside. Yeah, no, that changes things a little bit for me. So notable warm-up observations as it pertains to wide receivers, Jahan Dotson and Britton Covey on the outside with Devonta Smith aligned inside. Yeah, honestly, that kind of changes everything. The fact that he is the one that's out there, I'm changing my stance here. So apologies to anybody who stopped the show early. That is going to change things for me. If he's warming up with the starters, I think that is a pretty good indication that he will at least get the first run. And I don't know that he's going to be a full-time player still because they just haven't really used him on offense in the past. But I do think that makes it more likely that it is going to be Britton Covey who gets the start, that he's at least going to be a part of the rotation there. So now it's flipping everything that I'm saying. So Brian's asking how much Paris Campbell is too much in the flex. I'm lowering my Paris Campbell now that we see that Britton Covey is lining up with the starters in warmups. I think that's important information. Like that tells us what they most likely want to do. The fact that he's warming up with the starters, that's important. I'm going to adjust. I am going to play some Britton Covey. Where do we have the projected? This is probably going to move up because we're not the only people seeing the news here, but want to see where he's projected at. Yeah, projected for sub 1% ownership. I'm going to refresh this just in case. All right. Okay, so it has not changed yet, but I do think that we're not going to be the only people seeing that news. It is worth noting. I think that people are going to adjust. I'm changing my stance entirely. I I like Britton Covey quite a bit better now that I hear he is lining up with the starters. You'd think if Paris Campbell, if they want to start Paris Campbell, the guy who has been on the practice team, has not been up, playing with the starters, they would want him out there warming up with the starters. So yeah, I think you need to. I'm adjusting from liking Paris Campbell, thinking he was most likely to get the most reps, to I think Britton Covey is the guy now. I think he is the most likely. I think Paris Campbell now more likely to be just a reserve option. Still playable. I think that the fact they called him up means he could get some reps. But Britton Covey probably getting the first shot here and not going to be super highly owned. So yeah, changes my outlook on the wide receivers for the Eagles. I do appreciate you calling that to my attention, because I can't be scouring news while I'm on here. Really appreciate that. Okay, any other questions? Price aside, would I like to use an optimizer over a sim? I use optimizers. I'm going to be using this optimizer as soon as I'm done here, the Rotogranus optimizer. I've had success with optimizers. I like the amount that I can tell it what I want my lineups to look like. I don't think there's a wrong answer. I think that, sims are great in general. I think that they are helpful. They're going to give you plus EV lineups most likely, as long as if you trust the sims, they're probably going to give you lineups that project well. I like to do weird things with my lineups, and sometimes I do things that I think sims would not necessarily think are plus EV that I think are plus EV. So I like to use an optimizer to get it to do closer to what I really want my lineups to look like. But I think both are strong. There's no wrong option. All right. Oh, quick thoughts on FanDuel. Yeah. Mooney Captain, I don't have super strong opinions there. What do we got? Mooney at it's flex. Wait, Darnell Mooney. I have Captain pulled up. Oh, here's projected ownership. Yeah, I mean, if he's coming in at really low ownership, which it looks like he is, I like it. I'll play some Darnell Mooney in the captain spot at really low ownership. He also has that big play upside that we saw him have. Some didn't happen often, but some big plays back when he was on the Bears. I think he still has that kind of big play upside. So I like it. I think that's actually at low ownership, I'm into it. Yeah, you could play. I mean, the floor is still very low for Britton Covey, but I think, yeah, in a single bullet, I think he's a nice contrarian option to put into a lineup that projects really well. So I think that's totally fine. Just know, you could be accepting a zero there, but yeah, I think the fact that he's, playing with the starters right now, and probably not many people will have him. I like him as an option now. I have completely changed course. Okay. FanDuel, I'll pull up actually the optimizer on FanDuel real quick, and we can take a look at the Roto-Grinders numbers here, and then I will close it up. I guess I can build a lineup or two real quick. But at FanDuel, MVP, looking at the projected ownership, yeah, Jalen Hurts in the MVP. Not surprising that he is going to get steamed at the MVP spot. Saquon Barkley, Devonta Smith. So generally, my favorite are going to be Bijan Robinson if he's gonna come in at sub 10% ownership here. I think I've seen different numbers around the industry, so I'm not sure I trust this. I think Bijan will get more than 10% ownership, but if he's going to be low owned, sign me up for some Bijan. Cousins, that this is lower owned than he should be in the MVP spot. He's capable of throwing for 400 yards and 300 yards and 3 touchdowns and being the optimal MVP. That's still, I think, within his range of outcomes. We don't know that for sure, but he's a good option. Drake London, sub 1%. I like playing guys that have big upside. We can see the big upside for 100 yards and a touchdown, 2 touchdowns, getting very low ownership, even if they're not super likely to do it. I'd rather, in large field GPPs, I would rather lower, be a little bit lower than the field on Jalen Hurts at MVP, even though he's a great MVP option. Even it out a little bit, bring up some of the ownership on some of these other options at MVP, because they certainly are capable of outscoring Jalen Hurts. So that would be my MVP take on FanDuel. And then as far as flex options go, I mean, you just always see way too low ownership on some of the guys who aren't as involved. Ray McLeod, you can see you're at 11.5%. Britton Covey, now I do think he's going to be a great option. What's the price tag on Britton Covey? Like he's going to be super low owned on FanDuel. So I think he will be a strong play on FanDuel. I know I said the opposite. Forgive me for completely changing course here, but have to when we get more information. Players like Gainwell seems fine. I mean, 7,500. That's a little bit much for Gainwell. So I don't know that I love that. But yeah, Britton Covey going to be super low owned. I kind of like that. Will Shipley at 6,000. I think that's a fine play on FanDuel. Just going with some of these. Falcons at 16% ownership. I don't like it quite as much as DraftKings for $8,000 Falcons, more expensive. I like it better on DraftKings. Is that enough takes on FanDuel? Johnny Wilson sub 10%. I think that's a fine play. But yeah, Britton Covey. I mean, if he's lining up with the starters, I could be wrong about this, but that seems to me to indicate he's going to start. I like it. I'm going to be playing some Britton Covey at low ownership on FanDuel. I think that is a good bet. All right, and I am over time, so I'll just do real quickly, and I'm only going to do DraftKings. But let's make a lineup. Wait. Here we go. So we talked about some of my favorite captain options, and I will do we talked about Saquon. I don't love him as much in the flex, but I do like him in the captain spot at low ownership. So let's throw Saquon in there. I do think, I completely 180'd here, but I'll throw Britton Covey in there. Falcons defense I like in there as well. So a lot of people say this lineup sucks because it has Saquon Barkley in the captain and also Falcons defense, but maybe it's a pick six. And, there are ways for both to hit together, even with the running back usually more involved in a positive game script. Not always the case. So I don't worry that much about those negative correlations. I think that there are stories you can tell where they both hit. Let's throw Devonta Smith in here. Bijan. And Drake London, leaving 2,100 on the table. You've got Saquon Barkley in there. We don't have the Eagles defense. It correlates better with the Eagles defense than the Falcons defense. So I guess that is a swap that we could make. Maybe that's a slightly better lineup. You're still leaving enough salary on the table. Still leaving 1,100 on the table. I think you can play it either way. This will be slightly more duplicated, but also, slightly better correlation, I think, with Saquon and the Eagles defense. You've got Britton Covey, Devonta Smith. You don't have the only player in here that you need to outscore Jalen Hurts is Bijan Robinson, because no other player has the 1,100 left over isn't enough to get to Jalen Hurts from Devonta Smith. So I kind of like that about this lineup, that you come up just short. Like, okay, you can't get to Devonta Smith. So even if Jalen Hurts outscores Devonta Smith by a few points, that's totally fine. Like that does not kill this lineup, because other lineups aren't going to have that swap from Devonta Smith to Jalen Hurts. You do need Bijan Robinson to outscore Jalen Hurts, so keep that in mind. But this is, to me, looks like a pretty solid large field GPP lineup. I'll do one more. I'll do a Jalen Hurts captain lineup. I kind of like the idea of a full-on onslaught. And here's one thing that I've been toying with, is a Jalen Hurts onslaught with the only representative from the Falcons being the defense. The Falcons offense just does absolutely nothing in this game. And we can just fill in Devonta Smith, Saquon Barkley, 6,400 left over for our final player. Throw in Jake Elliott. Just Hurts with Goddard, with Smith. You got Barkley, Elliott. The only representative is the Falcons. This is just playing the studs for the Eagles in your Jalen Hurts Eagles onslaught lineup. The Falcons defense, the offense can't get anything going. The Falcons defense doesn't even need a touchdown necessarily. Maybe two interceptions and 3 sacks. And the Eagles only put up 21 points. And some of these guys get here through a PPR scam. this is going to look like a really solid lineup. So this is one that it's counterintuitive. Not a lot of people will want to do a lineup like this with Jalen Hurts and the Falcons defense, but it's certainly capable of winning in a way that people don't expect. All right. Yeah, sorry for not doing that much of FanDuel, guys, but I do need to get going because I need to make my lineups before the game starts. Really appreciate all of you hanging out here with me, though. It is fun as always. If you have not subscribed to the channel, really do appreciate trying to grow the channel. Would appreciate anybody subscribing, liking the video, commenting. All of that really does help with the YouTube algorithm as I try to grow the channel. But thank you guys very much, and I will catch you on Thursday.